welcome along to a special Champions League edition of The Match as we reflect on Real Madrid's group stage draw in the competition. The Whites being drawn against Juventus, Galatasaray and FC Copenhagen. With me to reflect on the draw is Sid Lowe. Sid, good draw for Real Madrid?
Yeah, I think so, and I think it's a good draw for a number of reasons. The bottom line is that when you're a seed, the chances are you're going to get a relatively comfortable draw. It didn't happen for Real Madrid last year. I think it was a really, really difficult group to start with, although, of course, Madrid were helped by Manchester City's collapse. This year it's not like that, and I think they will go through, and I think they'll go through relatively comfortably, and I think there's a good chance that they'll win the group as well, which of course means that going forwards they're in a stronger position. But I also think it's the kind of group that at least holds some interest, because sometimes if you get a really weak group, it's as if it doesn't really happen and you don't really start until you get into knockout phases. For example, look at the Chelsea group with former Real Madrid manager Jose Mourinho. It's a kind of group that doesn't inspire much excitement. Whereas this, you've got a trip away to Galatasaray, which is always a great trip, of course, in terms of the fans, in terms of the atmosphere and so on. And so I think that will be enjoyable. And then you've got Juventus. And before Copenhagen fans get upset, that unfortunately is reality now. And then you've got Juventus, which of course from Real Madrid's point of view is a big rival. Really quite exciting and emblematic club from Real Madrid's point of view, because it's the club against whom they won the 7th European Cup after a 32-year wait. Of course, it's also the club of a certain Carlo Ancelotti and Zinedine Zidane. Absolutely, it really is a glamorous tie against the champions of Italy, the most successful team in the history of Italian football, against the most successful team in the history of Spanish football. Let's take you through the fixtures then for Real Madrid in this season's group stage of the Champions League. And for me, the first and the last games could be problematic. Obviously, going away to Istanbul in your first game and then going to Copenhagen in the depths of December, like I said, could potentially be problematic. I mean, the good news from Real Madrid's point of view, maybe, now obviously we don't know this for sure, but maybe that when they go to Copenhagen things are more or less settled. The bad news is they go to Galatasaray, which theoretically at least will be relatively difficult. And that's the first game when you know, we're only, what's that, 2 weeks away now, 2 and a bit weeks away, when perhaps Madrid haven't yet found their feet, when they're coming off the back of an international break, because of course they will be, when they're perhaps not quite ready. And that is a game that to some extent will set the tone for the group. So there is a danger, not just in maybe not getting the 3 points from that game, but in the impact that then has on Madrid's next few games. So I think going to Istanbul first is probably the one thing that Madrid will look at the group and thought, didn't like that.
Well, let's get some reaction to the draw from Real Madrid's Director of Institutional Relations, Emilio Butragueño.
Uno siempre lo quiere mejor, pero...
Well, you always want a better group. Juve are a very, very tough opponent. We played against Galatasaray last year, and they are very strong at home. Copenhagen might seem like an unknown, but in 2010 they managed to qualify for the next round. So we will have to work very hard. Every game will be important. We'll have to see what order the games fall in, but logically we have to have confidence in our team and that they'll make the next round.
Emilio Butragueño speaking there, saying he has to have confidence in the team, and like you said, Sid, you fully expect Real Madrid to get through without too many problems.
Without too many problems, and I suppose the question mark then becomes whether they can get through in first place and how much of an impact that has on the draw in the next round. That's not necessarily a guarantee of anything, because of course finishing first is only an advantage if everyone who you assume is going to finish first continues to finish first, otherwise it can be a disadvantage. I think they will get through comfortably. I think in Copenhagen, although they'll probably be boosted to some extent by the return of Solbakken and the coach, but you know, I think I'm right in saying that they haven't won in 6 games in the league so far, and they're quite possibly amongst the 3 or 4 weakest teams in the competition.
Let's briefly reflect upon last season's Champions League campaign for Real Madrid. What will Madrid have learnt from last season's efforts?
It's a good question. I'm of the opinion that Madrid's Champions League campaign last year was good without ever being great. That they got through a very difficult group, and that in itself is a huge success. But a difficult group where, as I said at the very start, it felt to me like they were aided by the collapse of Manchester City, and that enabled them to go through without being brilliant. I thought they were very good for about half an hour against Manchester United at Old Trafford, but admittedly that comes after a red card. They then defeated Galatasaray relatively comfortably, and then of course we got to the Borussia Dortmund game where Madrid nearly turned it round in the second leg, but I think they came across a really good side. I think if there is a lesson that Real Madrid learned last year, and possibly actually combining last year and the year before, it's that when you come across a team that doesn't let you counter-attack, you have to have something else. And I felt at times over the last couple of years that Real Madrid was so focused on playing a certain way, which was bring teams onto you, hit them on the break, and in that sense I think Madrid are the best team in the world by miles on the counter-attack over the last couple of years. But when those other teams said, okay, well, you can't counter-attack us if we don't attack you. And I felt in those situations Madrid sometimes lacked a little bit of guile, a little bit of agility, a little bit of the ability to unpick a tight defence, and then they themselves got caught out by teams that counter-attack really well. And the other thing that's worth pointing out here, Borussia Dortmund in Dortmund were absolutely brilliant. I mean, it's not that Madrid were knocked out by a bad team. They were knocked out, in my opinion, by the team that I most enjoyed watching in Europe last year.
Well, it all gets underway on the 17th of September for Real Madrid in Istanbul against Galatasaray. Can't wait. Hope you've enjoyed the show. From Sid and myself, it's adios.